What we witnessed this afternoon in New York was not a routine general debate address. It was a piece of political theatre calibrated for three audiences at once: the MAGA-leaning slice of American opinion, an anxious Israeli audience, public divided over hostages and war aims, and a world that has grown unconvinced by Israel's conduct in Gaza. The optics told the story before the words began. As Benjamin Netanyahu reached the lectern, rows of delegates stood and filed out while others applauded, forcing the chair to call for order. That tableau, empty seats below, cheering observers above, framed everything that followed. First, the set-piece claims. Netanyahu reprised a familiar visual grammar, a big prop map of what he calls Iran's terror axis, and a barrage of declarative lines about decisive Israeli victories. Hamas crushed, Hezbollah crippled, the Houthis hammered. Iran's atomic and missile programs devastated. The rhetoric is crafted to rebut isolation with momentum, to swap opprobrium for deterrence. Yet the strategic picture he paints is disputed by events and by the very walkout that greeted him. Second, the message discipline. The speech was tuned to American conservatives. He thanked President Trump by name, invoked 9/11, and presented Israel as doing the dirty work against a shared enemy. That choice was not accidental. Support for Israel has slipped in US polling since the early months of the war, while Europe's patience has visibly thinned. Pitching to Trump's base helps anchor Israel's most important external pillar at a moment when other props are wobbling. Third, the Gaza broadcast. In a move that will be debated in war colleges and ethics seminars for years, Israel elected loudspeakers on trucks around the border to blast Netanyahu's speech into Gaza. His office suggested phone streaming too. The stated aim was public diplomacy, plus direct messaging to Hamas fighters and to hostages. The practical effect was psychological operations against a besieged civilian population, and it drew immediate criticism, including from Israeli hostage families who prefer to deal in symbolism, who prefer a deal to symbolism. Fourth, the genocide charge and the civilian protection claim. Netanyahu insisted that Israel pleads with civilians to leave, drops leaflets, and is being libeled by those who accuse it of genocide or starvation tactics. That runs headlong into a formal finding by the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry, which concluded this month that Israel had committed genocide in Gaza, citing both leadership statements and patterns of conduct. Israel categorically rejects the report. The clash between Israeli narrative and UN legal determination is now central to diplomatic posturing and positioning in New York and beyond. This is not to say that the stated desire of Hamas to kill Jews, to kill Israelis, is not equally genocidal. It is. The problem is Hamas is not a state. Israel is. And Hamas is a terrorist organization which must be roundly condemned, particularly for the October the 7th attack, which was horrific. Fifth, statehood recognition and diplomatic isolation. Netanyahu denounced the UK, France, Canada, Australia and others for recognizing a Palestinian state this week, calling it sheer madness. Whatever one's view, the trend line is unmistakable. Recognition is no longer confined to the global south. That shift, timed to the UN high-level week, is intended by its sponsors to preserve a two-state horizon and to signal costs for permanent occupation. The recognition that Britain gave to Palestine as a state was specific to exclude Hamas. So I don't think that Netanyahu and his cabinet can possibly claim that the British recognition of the Palestinian state is a reward to Hamas. It's a specific exclusion of Hamas for perpetuity from any form of Palestinian politics, any form of governance. It's the end of Hamas, politically. Now, the counterpoint that arrived from Washington. President Trump declared yesterday that he will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank, an unmistakable public red line aimed at as much at Israeli coalition partners as at the UN audience. It is rare to see daylight on a core territorial question set out so tersely by a US president who otherwise frames himself as Israel's staunchest ally. That line matters because parts of Netanyahu's coalition openly advocate annexation as a riposte to European recognition and to the ICC warrant environment. I think it's important to recognise that it is possible to do two things at the same time. It is possible to condemn the Israeli revenge actions of the Netanyahu government and at the same time to condemn absolutely the Hamas terrorist attack on October the 7th. It is possible to condemn both. It is possible to pursue peace. What then are the implications of this talk today? I think there are six. First, the audience, the speech sought to harden core US political support rather than rebuild a fraying multilateral coalition. The applause in the US section contrasted sharply with the emptiness on the floor. That may be rational politics if one believes Washington alone matters. It's a poor multilateral statecraft when sanctions, legal processes and recognition cascades are being driven from Europe and UN bodies. The second point is narratives and numbers. Netanyahu's assertion that Israel has devastated Iran's programs and crippled Hezbollah is crafted for deterrence, but it invites verification at a time when the region remains volatile and Israel's northern front has hardly gone quiet. Strategic messaging is not the same as strategic effect. Diplomats will parse deeds in the weeks ahead. The fact that he also spoke of peace overtures to Syria and to Lebanon, I thought was positive. There was a lot that was positive in the speech. The third point, the lawfare. The UN genocide finding will not vanish because a leader mocks it from the dais. It binds political debate to legal frames that will shape arms export decisions, universal jurisdiction risks for travellers and corporate compliance. Even allies that reject the label must now reckon with its downstream consequences in courts, procurement and public opinion. The fourth point, the hostages. Reading the names of the 20 believed alive was poignant, but broadcasting into Gaza will strike many Israelis as theatrical unless it is coupled to a credible deal. Families publicly opposed the loudspeaker plan today. That dissonance between spectacle and substance remains the core political vulnerability of the government. The fifth point, the statehood momentum, and with Western recognitions announced and a US annexation veto declared, the diplomatic field has tilted. Recognition doesn't create sovereignty, but it creates obligations. Conversely, if Israel were to move towards annexation, it would collide not only with Europe, but also with a stated US red line. And that triangle will shape every capital's calculus as ceasefire and post-war arrangements are discussed. And the sixth point is a psychological operation. Blasting a leader's speech into tents and rubble risks looking like triumphalism to the outside world and cruelty to those inside. It may stifle resistance rather than sap it. In information wars, tone is a weapon. Here it may have backfired. So where does this leave Britain and Europe? Recognition has hardly been issued by London and Paris, and Brussels is weighing tariff and sanction options that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. If the US holds firm on annexation and pursues a ceasefire hostage arrangement, Europeans will feel licensed to tighten conditionality and settlement expansion and humanitarian access. The gap between allied capitals has narrowed slightly, not because leaders warmed to each other, but because legal and political gravity is pulling them towards a constrained endgame. A final thought about the walkout itself. It wasn't a mere stunt. At the UN, choreography is language. The empty chairs were a sentence in a language Netanyahu knows well. Your victories may be real, but your coalition is thin. The ovation from the gallery was another sentence. Your base is fervent, but it lives upstairs. Great speeches can redraw maps. Today's address brandished a map. It didn't redraw on. The bottom line is that Netanyahu used the UN to harden partisan support in the United States, to signal resolve to Israel's enemies, and to deny the charge of genocide. The immediate diplomatic effect was the opposite of conciliation: a public walkout, fresh scrutiny of the Gaza broadcast tactic, and a new American red line on annexation that contrasts and constrains his right flank options. The war of narratives continues, but the numbers that matter now, the numbers that matter most, are legal votes, recognition tallies, and the living names on the hostage list. And before closing, I think it's worth pointing out that I didn't like a lot of what Netanyahu said, but his performance as a statesman, as somebody who was giving a significant speech, was faultless. It was faultless. It was a brilliant piece of oratory and communication. And it sort of, to me, it was a bit of an eye-opener. It explains to me why he has such a grip on Israeli politics and Israeli life, because he is a brilliant communicator. The problem is the substance, and the substance doesn't work. He has run out of substance, and he's run out of support.